Commercialization of cell culturing and precision fermentation. We are almost set. I will use this opportunity to introduce our speakers, with more chairs coming on our stage. And I'm told our first speaker, Jean Louwrens, hasn't arrived, CEO of co-founder, so she will not be joining us for this panel. But we have Francesca Pedri, Sustainability Project Lead Investments and Advisory at GERBER-RAUTH, joining us today. We have Brian Sylvester, partner at Perkins Coie. We have Dr. Leah Bessa, co-founder and CSO at the Novo Foodlabs. And the panel discussion moderator will be moderated by Julia Martin, Cellular Agriculture Lead at ProVeg International. Let's welcome them all with applause. Please make yourselves comfortable. As comfortable as it gets, given all the spotlights that the screen behind you is generating some extra warmth. So I hope you're comfortable with that. Enjoy.
Okay, wonderful. So hello, everyone. My name is Julia Martin. I am a bioengineer, food scientist, and flavor chemist. And I'm here representing ProVeg International. We are a charity that believes that cellular agriculture, among many other solutions, can contribute to creating a healthier, tastier, more ethical and more sustainable food system. And today I will be leading this panel on commercialization of precision fermentation and cell-based products. Cellular agriculture is, in the words of Isha Datter, the production of animal foods from cell culture. And just as a clarification, this includes both bacteria and also plant and animal cells, so in case that creates some confusion for some. Cell ag has been around for over 30 years, but really it has been in the last 10 that we have seen meaningful acceleration. Hundreds of companies have been founded, hundreds of millions of venture capital have gone into the space to fund and back these companies. We have also seen spectacular scientific advancements and the first regulatory approvals to see the first products come to market. However, for cell ag to significantly impact our food systems in the way that we would like to see, many challenges are still laying ahead. We have developers that still need further funding, further visions to scale up. Regulation must come up to speed to match developments, and the sustainability and nutritional value of these products must be matching consumer expectations and needs. So today I have the pleasure to discuss such multidimensional topic in the company of an excellent panel. Today we are joined by Dr. Leah Bessa. She is the CSO and co-founder of the Novo Foodlabs, a biotech working on sustainable food innovation via precision fermentation. Leah is an expert in alternative protein production with experience spanning the spectrum of novel food sources, including insects, plants, and precision fermentation. She leads the Novo Foodlabs, driven by a passion for sustainability and nutritional advancement. We also have Francesca Pedri, who is the Sustainability Project Lead at GERBER-RAUTH, where she pursues projects and investments in the dairy ecosystem with a sustainability lens on novel foods, plant-based alternatives, and traditional dairy. Francesca is driven by a keen interest in the social and environmental impact finance can power. And finally, Brian Sylvester, who is partner at Perkins Coie and practices food and drug law at the firm's Washington, D.C. office. He is a leading authority in food tech regulation, advising global brands, startups, life science companies, and investors. Brian has extensive experience developing regulatory strategies to commercialize a range of food tech innovations, including transgenic crops, and has also been part of cultivated meat and fermentation-derived ingredients approval. Today, we will be touching on a few panels, but I am really encouraging you to start preparing your questions. We'd really love to see some public participation at the end of the session, given that we have such incredible expertise on stage. And with that, I would like to start with our first subtopic, which should be the funding environment, and I would love to approach Leah with this question. We have discussed this earlier today. We are in a consolidation funding environment at the moment. Leah, how is this modulating commercialization horizons in food startups as yourself? And could you extend perhaps your answer beyond precision fermentation and think of, you know, the broader cell ag space, perhaps others in cultivated meat as well?
Sure. Yeah, the funding ecosystem now has really created a different mindset for startups, and I think as well for corporates and potential partnerships. It was spoken about on the previous panel where startups are now looking at blending with corporates and partners and leveraging their capabilities instead of building their own necessarily. So there's definitely a new way of using funding and leveraging what's already existing in the ecosystem. I think it's a really good approach, honestly. It definitely brings startups that have, you know, novel ideas and new tech into the actual food space, which is ultimately where you want to have the impact. And I think ultimately that's going to make or accelerate a lot of the innovations and make them more relevant for food and for the end consumer, which is going to be the food space. So there's definitely a push and a move towards working with food companies, big food companies, leveraging their capabilities. But also on the previous panel, it does have the downside where you do have long lead times for generating these partnerships. So yeah, when it comes to precision fermentation and cell ag or cultivated meat, I mean, there's the temptation to put them in the same basket, but I think they're wildly different beasts, to be honest, especially when it comes to scale up and the risk to go to market. There's not as many, you know, CDMOs and existing capabilities for cell culture, so it definitely has additional challenges. But I think in that way, companies can really come together and start working together as opposed to being so siloed, which is really where you're going to be able to drive innovation and scale a lot faster. Precision fermentation has the benefit of it having a lot of scale-up options, but, you know, at the same time, there's only so much capacity, so there's challenges there too.
And Leah, beyond then cooperation and perhaps corporate involvement, do you see also an opportunity in public funding coming into the equation? We have seen some positive developments. There have been recent rounds of public funding entering in big companies here in Europe. So do you think that's also an avenue that is interesting, that is desirable?
Yeah, definitely. I think as with any funding, you have to weigh up the pros and the cons, and you know, public funding, there's the temptation that sometimes it's free or non-dilutive, which, you know, nothing's free. There's a lot of time that goes into getting funding. But I definitely think it has a big impact. So we have received public funding from the South African government, and that's really allowed us to leverage universities and their capabilities for funding and innovation. So I think the plus side is that it often is not non-dilutive. You can start engaging with different entities and government entities to bring the product to market as well. There's obviously downsides as well where public has their own mandate. Sometimes you're limited to certain regions or core capabilities or what you can spend the money on. So I guess with any funding, there's always the pros and the cons, but I think there's definitely a world where we can leverage it a lot more.
Okay, Francesca, following that thought, if public funding becomes part of the existing cap tables, what does it mean for incumbent investors? So is this desirable, or can potential restrictions that come attached to public funding, for example, mandates regarding open innovation, could these be challenges that, what is your perspective on this as investor?
Okay, so let me start with the desirable characteristics. I would say that public funding is a reliable, stable source of capital. It's fantastic when it comes to maybe de-risking early stage startups and innovation in that space. It could come in later as well, you know, where venture capital wouldn't fund, for example, a large capex project. Public funding is going to need to step in, to be honest. I think that's very attractive to me and my company for sure. And I would also say that it has a fantastic signaling effect. It's almost like a stamp of credibility, or it's like, I believe in you, and everybody likes that. So I would say, yeah, there are many desirable factors. Open innovation is one, but I'll touch on that in a minute. Some of the considerations that I would have for a public organization or a public entity investing and joining a cap table would be the effect on governance and control. So many of the kind of repercussions would be the same for a large private investor, but when it comes to public organizations, maybe they have a specific mandate where it comes to rights to a board seat, and they would have oversight of strategy or involvement in strategy. Potentially their expected returns or the horizons are slightly different from the private sector, and that can impact the exit. So I would ask some questions around that if I had the opportunity to with some of the founders. And other than that, I think, yes, you mentioned there could be some issues around open innovation. Personally, I'm very much in favor of this because you can save time, you can save money, you can have a fantastic experience doing more than just the standard collaboration. But there could be an impact on the perceived value of the company if you're not protecting your IPR, because in the world of investment, that's one of the most important things for us. We want to know that you've got something solid and you're defending it. So there are pros and cons, everything is different. And I think at the end of the day, a public investor is pragmatic. They want to get return, even if that's for the public or the crown. And I think it's more desirable than undesirable.
Okay, fantastic. Brian, now to you. Going back again with the funding environment, you work very closely with companies that are developing those strategies to break into that commercialization. In your experience recently in this, again, consolidation funding environment, have you seen resource allocation towards building these regulatory strategies change or transform? In which ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that regulatory considerations are not always top of mind for companies. Obviously, they need to perfect the science, but I think sometimes the downside is that when you've promised your investors and other stakeholders that you're coming to market, and then you realize you don't have your strategy in place for your regulatory pathway, there could be some issues. And so I actually volunteer as a mentor to a couple accelerators, and in that way, I think I try to make that really clear that they should be considering their regulatory pathways, and including on a global basis, like a multi-jurisdictional approach. Do I want to commercialize in the EU, the United States, Canada, Singapore? Like, what are my best options to get to market quickly and to have a big impact from a business perspective? For me, I've seen a number of companies increase their focus on regulatory recently. Obviously, it depends on the subset of technology that we're talking about. So for cultured meat, cultivated meat, obviously, that requires a lot of strategy and advising and counsel all along the way. I think in pretty much every jurisdiction, right? Especially in the United States. When it comes to something like precision fermentation, that's also very complex, but I think if you have a team at the company that's capable and they have like a regulatory affairs manager, for example, then as an outside advisor, I can kind of get that person up to speed on what they need to do and give them the right direction. And in that way, the process could be streamlined so that you're not paying a lot of money outside of your company to an external advisor. So it might be investing in an internal hire. I think that's one way to kind of be efficient in this environment.
Thank you. I want to bounce partly that question to you, Francesca. So it is, as Brian was saying, regulatory is an important milestone, or breaking into being able to commercialize your products, an important milestone for any startup. How high is it really in VC's priority list when making this, long-term deep tech investments, as many of the ones that we see in Cell Ag? How true is it that it's a make or break consideration? And in such sense, and given how different the regulatory landscape or the regulatory potential looks like in Europe in comparison to other geographies, for example, the US and Singapore, do you feel that perhaps innovation or cell ag innovation in the EU is perhaps at a disadvantage when compared with other geographies?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it's high up on the priority list because, as I stated, it's going to affect how fast you can get to market, how fast you can commercialize. So it is very important to an investor. As far as it comes to disadvantaging as far as the current regulatory environment in the European Union comes to disadvantaging certain startups based here, I think to me, it's relatively limited because, I mean, we live in a global world. Obviously, it's not great when you have a venture capital firm with a horizon of 7 to 10 years and you have uncertainty around how fast it's going to take you to get to market. But ultimately, I do believe in the science. I do believe that once you get there in Europe, you know, you've reached a fantastic milestone in food safety, let's say, and that product then can go all over the world. And I think there is a very good reputation in Europe for products that have that sort of like rubber stamp. So it certainly wouldn't put me off when it comes to investing.
And then taking up on this, comparison between the US and Europe, there have been, and perhaps zooming into cultivated meat. Brian, well, you have seen that cultivated meat has been instrumentalized in a way in a very polarized environment, political environment in the US. There have been some bans, there have been some, it's at the center of a very strong polarization. Do you think that these recent developments can compromise in the future further regulatory efforts in the cell ag space in general, and perhaps change the potential that is there for innovation?
Another great question. I do think that, on the heels of the Florida and the Alabama bans on the production and manufacture of cultivated meat and the sale of cultivated meat, it does kind of raise the question as to what's going to happen next. We have Upside and Good Meat that have their approvals to move forward. We have other companies in progress with the FDA and USDA. I do think ultimately that once the federal regulators kind of further flesh out the framework, that those laws at the state level will be preempted, especially when it comes to products regulated by the USDA. So those are meat and poultry products that are made from cell-cultured cells. Basically, the way that the laws are written, once USDA has approved something, then the state laws are preempted. Right? It supersedes the state law. It may take some time, though, for that to kind of potentially work through the courts. It remains to be seen exactly how this will all play out. I saw a statement from the Texas governor applauding what Florida and Alabama did, and obviously there are going to be other states that will follow suit. Different state-by-state laws are nothing new in the United States, but when the federal government has spoken on a topic saying that something is safe and may be sold in what we call interstate commerce, state to state, then it does mean that trumps typically the state laws. And so in the long run, I don't see this as being a problem, but I do think for optics, maybe for consumer acceptance purposes, I think it would be a huge problem potentially. And so even more of a reason for companies to coalesce together. I know there are coalitions and other informal ways that the companies already connect, but I think this might be kind of like a call for companies to really kind of come together and really get the messaging right with customers amidst this environment, and also coming on the heels of all the scrutiny over the past year in the press, right? Especially in the United States, but on a global level, questioning the scalability and safety of the products.
Yes, you've touched in such a difficult topic, which is consumer acceptance, right? It's such a big interrogant we all have. And one of the most important stakeholders, right? Because consumers are really what can, they have to take the decision or can take the decision to make this, make a significant impact on the food system or not. So just to close off our session, because time passes faster than I expected. So first to Leah, what do you think are the biggest challenges that need to be overcome to minimize the risk of consumer acceptance from a business perspective, so as an innovator, and in terms of business viability in your case as a startup founder?
I think the first thing that needs to be done, which a lot of startups don't actually do, is actually speaking to the customer and consumer. That's a really important step, and it's like a step that should be continuous, so really understanding what consumers want, but not just what they're saying they want, what they actually want. That really helps mitigate a lot of the challenges and will preempt some of the inevitable R&D challenges that you'll be having. So that's like step one. Regulations is, I mean, you touched on it now, it's a huge thing, and it plays either a positive or a negative for optics as well. So I think it's really important for everyone to be using the same messaging and agreeing on how to communicate the technologies, and also how much information is too much information sometimes. You know, consumers don't know everything that's in their food already, and now we're like giving so much information that it's perhaps too much sometimes, because they don't, now you need to go study science to understand what your food is telling you. So I think there's definitely a fine balance between safe food and just telling the right information. Yeah, and then at the end of the day, it's also got to be taste. I think there's the temptation to follow the tech trend where you just take your MVP to market and for people to try. And I think that happened a lot with the plant-based products, is people will try it in a tasting session and it's not your final product, but they'll never go back again because it's left that long-lasting impression, because, you know, food's very emotional. So there's definitely like a balance between taking a product to consumers when it's actually good versus trying to iterate with you know, maybe the consumers that don't understand that you're iterating.
That's difficult one, right? Because I've also heard the great Paul Shapiro saying that if you're not embarrassed of your first product, then you're late. But yeah, I guess it's a fine balance there. But you've touched upon something really important, which is the safety considerations. What is, and here really comes of the hand of labeling, right? So how are we going to label these products to build that trust, and how are we going to make sure that that sense of safety is well transmitted to consumers? What are your thoughts on this, Brian, in terms of labeling and really conveying true trust in consumers?
Yeah, labeling is definitely a hot topic right now. We're expecting the USDA to roll out its proposed rulemaking for cultivated meat produced for cultivated meat and poultry products this year. And we're also looking potentially for guidance from the FDA on the labeling of plant-based meat alternatives. So it's on their list of priorities. FDA does not always get to their list of priorities, but it's supposed to happen this year. Last year we had a draft guidance from FDA on plant-based milk labeling specifically. That one has been, you know, a really hot topic, especially due to the dairy producing industry lobby over the years. Back in 2018, the FDA had collected information in a request for information regarding the appropriate naming for those products, those plant-based milk products. And so we're thinking that the draft guidance that the FDA is supposed to release this year for other plant-based products should borrow in large part from the concepts from that guidance from last year, in terms of they relied on consumer research heavily. They thought that having qualifying language on the front of pack panel was very important, so those kinds of things. It'll be interesting to see exactly what the recommendations are. And just for clarity, the draft guidance is just guidance. It's not a rule, right? But it does suggest how companies would want to strongly consider proceeding.
Thank you. And finally, in terms of sustainability, Francesca, I mean, we've been talking about health and value today, but there's also sustainability. There's also a nutrition dimension. How do you think sustainability needs to be represented to consumers in terms of these new products corresponding to these new technologies? What is the work that needs to be done there, and who are good allies, really?
Well, I think transparency. You know, I think the word greenwashing is heard, you know, constantly in the media, and so I think it's incredibly important for every company in the industry to validate their claims when it comes to sustainability. So, you know, I would like to see LCAs, I would like to see impact reports. I mean, it depends why you're in this business, right? But if you're going to use the sustainability message, I think you have to understand what you're doing and make sure that it's credible, because you need the consumer to trust you. I would say an ally would be working with established companies in the industry. You know, there's a fantastic example of a cooperative in Australia. It's a dairy cooperative, and it's working with a precision fermentation company. It's invested. They're partnering. So the consumer can recognize an organization that is trusted for over a century, actually, in this case. And I think it gives that kind of, that little bit of encouragement to get over the last hurdle, that this new stuff is coming. It's not scary. It's, you know, it's matched the price point, the taste point, and it's something exciting. So, yeah, that's it.
Great, fantastic. So we have a minute, well, thank you so much. We still have a minute and 10 seconds, I think, for questions from the public.
Yeah, we have someone.
So not so much as a question, but actually to share an experience. We are a startup in the cultivated meat space, Profuse, and the link between regulation and non-dilutive funds. So we started out with a government funding as a high-risk company. And one of the conditions we had was to start looking at regulation from day one. So we engaged Brian, by the way, I'm not on his behalf, just... And we started looking at regulation from day one, which was mostly to understand the regulation environment. It's taking resources from the company in terms of funding and time, but it's very important because it helped us focus our product and be just right on the product market fit in terms of regulation. So for example, in our case, we did high throughput scanning of a lot of molecules. Many of them we just put aside because we knew that they are not going to be regulated. And then finally, we now got an EIC grant of $2.4 million, which half a million of it is going to go to complete our regulation work. And I think without the grant, we would not be able to complete it. So there's kind of synergy there, which I think is important. Thank you.
Anyone with a super quick question before lunch? Oh, we've got one. See, you're warming up with questions. It's always good to see.
Thank you very much. Already to mention the topic about labeling. So the first product will be not fully cultivated steaks or sausages. So do you think they still will called cultivated? Or can you...
Yeah, good question. So those are exactly, so back in 2021, the USDA published an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, and those are questions that they asked, like what if it's a hybrid product? And so we're looking forward to seeing the proposed rule based on all the comments that USDA got and collected back in 2021. It's very likely, almost 100%, that there will be some qualifying language that's required by the new regulation, but even when the proposed rule is published, there will be an opportunity to provide comments from industry. So we're looking for that.
And that's a quick comment closing the first part before lunch. Do enjoy lunch and don't forget to use the app, set up meetings if you like with anyone you're interested with for a conversation. Thank you again.